We have more updates from the NHL Waiver Wire. We also have an NHL veteran. It's a surprise healthy scratch for the evening. We have an update on Tony Deangelo, a new member to add to right near the top of the NHL trade bait board for the NHL trade deadline. And we're also looking at some trade options that the Maple Leafs are considering for another top 6 or top 9 winger. We'll get into all that coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. Now, as I mentioned, we have a variety of things to talk about here today. Here's your latest updates from the NHL Waiver Wire. Yesterday, we had Derek Ryan of the Calgary Flames on waivers. He did indeed clear as suspected here, so he will remain a member of the Calgary Flames. And of course, now they have the option to assign him either on the taxi squad or to their AHL minor league affiliate. And we also do have some new players on the waiver wire today, a couple of NHL veterans, including Valtteri Filppula, the Detroit Red Wings. Now, it's probably unlikely given his age and his recent performance that he gets claimed, but not much time left on the contract. Obviously, like I said, a veteran guy, but we'll see what happens with him. It gives the Red Wings a little bit more flexibility should he clear, which is what I suspect likely happens. We have Dominique Simon as well from Calgary. So the Flames, for the second straight day, have one of their forwards on the waiver wire. Of course, he was a pickup by Calgary in the offseason after leaving the Pittsburgh Penguins organization. I know he's had a pretty decent opportunity, even had a chance to play with Crosby for a while in Pittsburgh, but never really solidified a solid spot, and now finds himself here on the outs. Now, he's on a short-term cheap contract. I could see maybe a situation where a team takes a chance on a guy like him where he's still young enough and has a possibility of, maybe turning out to be a useful player for them. I know for the Calgary Flames, they'd probably like to hang on to him for the rest of the year, but at the same time, like some teams want roster flexibility to give different guys opportunities to play off the taxi squad. So we'll see how things go there. And the New York Rangers also have a player on waivers as well. Mason Gertzen, who was on an American Hockey League only contract, is on waivers. So that tells us he's likely getting his contract upgraded from an AHL deal to a regular two-way contract. So he would need to clear waivers in order to remain with their organization and even just to remain at the American Hockey League level. So I would assume he'll very likely clear as well. So we'll see tomorrow noon Eastern time if we have any further updates. Now, here's an update on Tony Deangelo, a player who's basically been shunned and banned from the New York Rangers organization after yet another controversy back last month. Of course, we found out that the Rangers were cutting all ties with him and sent him home awaiting a trade. Now, of course, Deangelo had been suspected and rumored that there was getting lots of interest early on. I know NHL reporters like Darren Dreger, for example, had reported that there was seemed to be a decent market for him, fair bit of interest, but at the end of the day, even though teams expressed interest, they never really got close to pulling the trigger on a trade. At the end of it here, I think most of it is they're kind of concerned about the PR fallout for taking on a player that has a lot of baggage and has a history of issues, dating back all the way to his junior days. So at this point, Tony Deangelo apparently has requested to the Rangers that he be loaned to an American Hockey League team. If he can't play in the NHL, he wants to go down to the AHL to have an opportunity to reprove himself here, if possible. But the Rangers will not assign him to their American Hockey League affiliate in Hartford. They want no part of him at anywhere in the organization. So that goes to show what their thoughts of him are at this point. So they're trying to work out to see if there's a possibility that another NHL team would accept him on their AHL team as a loan agreement. So we'll see if something gets worked out. At this point, Tony D just wants to play and have a chance at redemption, and right now there's not too many teams that are willing to give him a shot. So we'll see what happens. I do think that there's a good possibility that he technically remain a member of the New York Rangers past the season, and in the offseason he could become a buyout candidate. As I mentioned before, buying out an RFA is a lot less expensive than a pending UFA or somebody who had accomplished UFA status before. With his contract, it would only be a 1/3 of the amount over twice the period of time. So it would be pretty, less expensive. It wouldn't be all that much of a cap hit to them to do that. So if they can't find somebody to take him on without retaining much salary, it doesn't make sense. They'll buy him out, and we'll see what happens with his career from there. But at this point, looks like Tony D is a man without a home. Now, as I mentioned as well, we have a little bit of a surprise healthy scratch tonight, and that's Minnesota Wild forward Zach Parise. Now, apparently he's being kind of benched here and put on the shelf for a game due to not listening to the coaching staff and taking an extended shift in their last game. Apparently he was stuck out on the ice for about a minute and a half. He was trying to help his teammates here get a hat trick. Obviously, at the end of the game, they were having a lead and they ended up blowing the lead and losing in overtime to Vegas, and you could kind of say it was Parise's fault. He's the one that actually ended up deflecting the goal in the net. It just kind of spiraled into some bad luck. But Parise's owned the situation and said that he was, believes he was doing the right thing to try to help the team and help a teammate. But at the end of the day, he didn't go to the bench when he was supposed to, and the coaching staff and GM are not something you see a lot, but they're actually holding veteran players accountable. So we'll see how this goes with Parise in the future. I mean, there was a lot of talk last year about him maybe being traded. The Wild have been a bit of a surprise team. I know he still has a lot of term on his contract. It would be a tough contract to trade for starters. And I know he would probably love to win in Minnesota more than just about anything, but this might put a bit of a wedge between him and the coaching staff. We'll see, but Zach Parise will not be in the lineup when the Minnesota Wild take on the Vegas Golden Knights. Now, a new name to add to the NHL trade bait board that's drawing some attention from around the league is Arizona Coyotes defenseman Alex Goligoski, who's in the final year of his contract. And even though his contract cap hit is fairly substantial at well over $5 million, the actual cash value is much less, closer to $4 million. So the acquiring team, if they do make a deal, will not have to pay out nearly as much as the cap hit that remains on the deal. And if the Coyotes retain part of that, that'll make it even better and make it more affordable from a cap standpoint to make that deal happen. Now, of course, Goligoski, is a well-experienced NHL veteran in his mid-30s, somebody who can contribute a bit offensively as well. Being a left-shot defenseman, I do see there being a good market for him. I know NHL insiders are indicating that there is already a fair bit of interest, and Goligoski is very, very likely to be dealt. You'd have to imagine teams like the Winnipeg Jets are looking into this. I mean, obviously, they could always use help on their blue line. They're having a pretty solid year so far in the Canadian North Division. Having an extra blue liner like him would go a long ways. I mean, I know a team like Philly had been linked to a guy like Matthias Ekholm in Nashville. You think they'd probably check out this as well. And obviously, a team like the Bruins as well, obviously also linked to Ekholm. I would assume a lot of the same teams that are looking into Matthias Ekholm will also look into Goligoski. I mean, I think it's fair to say that Ekholm is probably the overall better defenseman, but he also has an extra year on his deal. So I guess you have to look at the salary cap for next year, and you also have to look at the Seattle expansion draft implications and what that's going to mean for your roster. Some teams obviously will, even if they prefer Ekholm, they all can't have him if the deal is reached. So clearly, Goligoski could very well end up being plan B or C for some of these teams that are trying to deal with Nashville here, and it could work out to be better anyway, in a sense, from a roster perspective, and not needing to protect them next year and all that. But like I said, a lot of them, if they really want to go for the cup, would probably prefer Ekholm, but at the same time, they have to look at what's best for their organization, not just this year, but beyond as well. Now, I also want to take a look at some options that the Toronto Maple Leafs are reportedly showing interest. They do plan to add to the deadline. Of course, they've been a very solid team, one of the top teams in the NHL, and Kyle Dubas is certainly going to give his team every chance he can to win in the playoffs based on how they've competed and fared against other Canadian teams so far this year. I would say for the first time in a while that I actually have more confidence that the Leafs very well could do some damage in the playoffs and very well could have a shot possibly to go at least as far as the conference finals. I mean, if you look at how the playoffs are going to be structured, they're going to play within their division until they get to the Final Four. If they're winning against the Canadian teams consistently, you'd have to think going into the playoffs, they very well could be the favorites to come out of that division. So obviously, you're not going to really face other teams from other divisions until you get to the conference finals or the Stanley Cup finals. But obviously, they're going to want to load up here. And there's a quartet of wingers that they're reportedly having interest in, showing some interest in having some potential discussions around. And that includes Mikael Granlund of the Nashville Predators. We've talked about Granlund before, being linked to Toronto and a few other teams. Obviously, a pending UFA, decent contract, decent pass, being a relatively productive winger. You've got Kyle Palmieri with the New Jersey Devils. Now, the Devils, I would think, would have interest to retain him and extend, but at this point, the reports are indicating that New Jersey is not engaged in any contract extension talks with any of their pending unrestricted free agents, which is somewhat surprising. I can understand the fact that they wouldn't necessarily want to bring them all back. They obviously have a pretty young group they want to continue building around, but some of these veteran guys are going to be useful and necessary to help those the young guys and mentor them and help them learn how to win. You would think Palmieri might be one of those guys, but at this point, right now, it looks as though he could be on the move. We've also got Tanner Pearson of the Vancouver Canucks, who we talked a bit about in the last day or two as well, as likely being available. And like I said before, Jim Benning obviously lost a lot of guys through free agency in last year's offseason, and it doesn't look like he wants to do that again this year. So even though the Canucks right now could be a playoff team, right now things are not trending in that direction, and they could turn out to be sellers, which is unfortunately for them quite likely. And if that's the case, then Pearson's a guy with a expiring contract that very well finds himself on the move, and has been a pretty productive, experienced top 9 forward who had some good Stanley Cup runs in the past with the Los Angeles Kings as well, and did okay in the playoffs last year with Vancouver. So I would think the Leafs certainly have interest in him. And of course, last but not least is Red Wings forward and former Ottawa Senator Bobby Ryan, who's certainly trying to rejuvenate his career with his offseason signing with Detroit after the buyout in Ottawa, and so far is having a pretty decent year. Now, of course, if you look at all these guys, Ryan would have the best contract, so clearly that might make things the most likely to be affordable, but it kind of also depends on what is given up. I would think that the Leafs very well could try to cut ties and include players like a Jimmy Vesey or Pierre Engvall in a trade discussion, maybe even a Travis Dermott. Those are likely to be the main pieces they would consider moving, depending on their overall cap situation and what's coming in versus out. Obviously, the less coming in, the less that has to go out. So a guy like Ryan might be the most intriguing in that scenario given his contract. But if you have some of these other teams retain up to 50% of the salary on a Granlund or possibly on a Tanner Pearson or on a Palmieri, then they could be pretty interesting here as well. And they might not have to give up a whole lot to do it. I mean, in some cases, they could give up more future-based assets instead of giving up as much off the roster to make sure they're as deep as possible for a playoff run. I mean, out of these 4 guys, I would have to think that they're kind of all slightly different players and what they kind of bring here. I mean, if they want to continue going the experienced route and going with players that have a lot of playoff experience, certainly Pearson is a guy that fits that mold. Granlund, to a degree, fits that mold. Ryan has some experience. Palmieri, not as much. Obviously, the Devils have missed the playoffs more than they've made it. But, Ryan obviously went on a long run with the Senators a couple of years ago, back in 2017, all the way to the conference finals. So at least the other 3 guys all have good playoff performances in their past. Pearson at least has a cup to his name. And certainly, when you look at the contracts, I would think Ryan might have an edge to be the guy that they might be looking at the most, but they might be looking at more than just year. They're going to look at what they can keep for next year and beyond as well. And certainly some of these guys could be decisions that are made in the offseason. But to me, it makes a lot of sense. If I was the Leafs, I would be bulking up as well. I think they stand a really good chance to come out of the North at this point. So you might as well try to be as deep as you can heading into the playoffs. So let me know of these wingers that the Leafs are apparently showing interest in to bulk up here in their top 3 lines for the potential playoff run after the trade deadline. Which one to you makes the most sense? Which one do you think they should target? And what kind of trade package would they require to get the deal done? Let me know your thoughts down below and we'll discuss further. If you're new to the channel, consider subscribing, turning on your notifications so you don't miss any future content, and give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. I'd appreciate it if you did. As always, thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.